Luke chapter 15, we're going to return to this familiar story that we have that we have looked at for the past few weeks. Luke chapter 15 today will begin in verse 20. So he got up and he went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him and hugged him and kissed him. Then his son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of his servants, the father, and asked what the son did, what was going on. The servant replied, "Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back safe and sound." Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, "Look, I have served you all these years and have never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate," there's a good Thanksgiving word for you, "after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." Then his father said, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." But we had to celebrate. We had to be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. This is the word of God for the people of God. And we said together, thanks be to God. The popular person, as we know in this parable, is the younger son. Comes to his senses. He's turned around from where he has been in the pig pen, and he goes home, as we saw a few weeks ago. He goes home to seek forgiveness from his father. And to our surprise, the father welcomes him home, but not with anger, not with fist raised, but he welcomes him home with open arms to hug this lost son of his. We talked about that. And the father throws a party. Now, the not so popular and not talked about person in this parable, in this narrative, is the older son. We looked at him a few weeks ago as well. The older son who has stayed home. He's done his duty. He's fulfilled all his responsibilities. He returns, though, from the field with bitterness and anger and jealousy just oozing out of his heart. And to our surprise, the father invites him in, not with anger, not with fist raised in anger, but he welcomes this older son with open arms, ready to hug this lost son of his. And the father welcomes him to the party. And I use the word, and to our surprise, as I use that, to our surprise that the father did this, because the majority of us in these kinds of situations and in these kinds of circumstances that the parable has described, the majority of us probably would not be so hospitable to our adult children if they came home like that. At the very least, we probably would have spent a few minutes rehashing it all, rehashing the hurtful words with them. We'd spend a few minutes rehashing their actions as they came into the door that both of them displayed before we offer our forgiveness. I mean, this is how it works. How often do we forgive others before having the talk? You know what I mean? A lot of times we want to talk it out. And then after I've gotten you to confess all of you've done and all that, then I'll offer forgiveness. I've done that, so I'm not pointing fingers here. But this father in Luke chapter 15, he's a bit different than most. If you remember a few weeks ago, when we were looking at the younger son, we thought that the return of the son, if you remember, cannot be fully understood. We can't really get a good idea. We can't understand the returning home unless we kind of get an idea of what it meant for him to leave in the first place. We talked about the leaving a few weeks ago. The younger son, when he asked for not only his inheritance, but he also asked for the right to do whatever he wants to do with the inheritance that the father gives to him. But remember, in that culture, as we talked about, after the father assigns his possessions, so to speak, over to the son, the father in that culture still has a right to live off that inheritance, he still has a right to live off those proceeds in that culture, as long as the father is still alive and is living. And so when the younger son gets what he wants, what the son wanted to do and what the younger son wanted to do, he wanted to have the right to do whatever he wanted to do with it, even though the father has a right to it to his death. In other words, as we talked about, the younger son wished his father dead. Ouch. And then a few weeks ago, we looked at the older brother. And the father now is put in a tough spot between the younger brother and the older brother. The elder son feels slighted, and he's furious with dad. He basically accuses his father of taking sides. And what's worse, the older son is made to feel like he's being manipulated by his father. And his father's taking advantage of the goodwill of the son who stayed home with the older brother. So the father, in some ways, is also not only rejected by the younger son, right? But he's also rejected by the older son. Ouch. And so today, I want us to look at, for a few minutes, the third character in this story that we don't really talk about much. And in some ways, like the older son, we take this character for granted. It's the father. How do you think the father felt about all of this from the very beginning? I wonder what's going through his mind when he hears his sons talk like that to him. I wonder what goes on in his heart when he sees his sons treating him like this. I mean, do you think he just brushed it off? They're just kids. Boys will be boys. He might even be wondering this. Maybe this was probably the question that came to his head. Where did I go wrong with my kids? Seeing both of them like this. How did I not see this coming from my boys? And so there's resentment even for the father. And it's hurtful for the father. Not only from his sons, but in that culture, even in today's world, there is no doubt a little bit of embarrassment happening in the community. Hey, did you hear what happened over at their house? Have you seen how those boys have treated their father? I hope I don't raise my kids like that. Sounds like those boys should have been given the what for a long time ago. Now, I put in there the switch, but in today's PC world, I call it the what for. But you know what I'm talking about. So the community, they're probably wondering, what's going on? And so can you imagine, there's a little bit of shame going on, even from the community. I'm sure that talk around town has probably dented the father just a little bit. A rejected father in these days, in today's culture, honestly, in many of them, obviously, many times, a father rejected in today's world, he would probably, I'm just talking about fathers, but in today's culture, the father would reject the son for his actions. No, don't take my word for it. All you got to do is walk into the schools every day. Talk to those kids. See some of that family dynamic. This happens every day, where fathers and families are punishing, taking it out on kids. That's just, right? And I'm sure the father in the narrative, like us, I'm sure this father in Luke 15 would have liked, before all of this happened, he would have liked to have had a talk with his kids first. He would have liked to have warned them about the dangers about what they are about to do. I'm sure the father, it doesn't say it, but I'm convinced, I'm sure the father probably has tried to do everything he could do to convince the boys to stay back. There are better options than this. He would have much rather pulled back those sons with his fatherly authority and hold them close and keep them here so they're not going to go out and get hurt. Because the father knows the dangers that are out there. Most fathers would have done that. This is what's going to happen. This is what you're in for. But maybe not this father. His father loves them too much to do any of that. Let me explain. This love from this father does not force, it does not constrain, it does not push or pull. Instead, the father's love offers a freedom for them to reject him or to show love in return. His children, the father wants his kids to truly be free. And the father's love does not come with any kinds of conditions to it. This freedom that he wants them to have also includes the possibility that they might leave home. It includes the possibilities that my boys might go off to a long, distant country where they may risk losing everything. I should do something here. And the father's heart knows all too well the pain that will come from the choices that these boys are making. But his love is too powerful to prevent them from doing it. He cannot make his kids love him, even if it means letting the sins of his children pierce his own heart. He gives them that freedom out of love. And there's no greed, there's no anger, resentment, jealousy, or vengeance. All of these things, none of those things that I'm sure they caused immense grief for this father. The father is grieving from it, no doubt. It's a grief that's hurtful because the father's heart is so pure. Yes, the father this morning has every right to be angry here. He has every right to be a little bit revengeful because of the way that they have treated him, the way they've made him look, the way they have opened up Pandora's box for the whole community to see. Yet in spite of all of those justified kinds of feelings, those justified kinds of inner turmoil that the father has, I say justified, in spite of all of that he could have had toward his boys, we get this answer from him instead. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, and hugged him, and kissed him. That's the father's response. Now watch this. The father doesn't even give his boys a chance to apologize. The father is not angry when he should be angry. And not only does the father forgive without asking questions, but he cannot wait. He can't hold it in. He can't wait to give them a new life, to show them a life in abundance. The father can't wait to give new life to his returning son. And nothing else will be good enough for this kid when he comes home. I'm going to give him all. The father says, I'm going to give my son the very best. And while the younger son is expecting to be treated like a servant, the father does a surprising thing, as we've seen. He gives him a robe that is normally reserved for distinguished guests at these parties. But he takes the robe and he puts it on his son. And even though the prodigal son no longer feels worthy, what does the father also do? He gives him a ring, a signet ring on his finger, and sandals for his feet, so he can honor him as his beloved son and restore him as an heir. He does not want any of his children to be considered slaves or servants. Instead, he wants his kids to wear the robe of honor, the ring of inheritance, and he wants them to have on the sandals of prestige. Kill the fattened calf. Put out all the stops. Let's celebrate like we've never celebrated before. There's plenty of food for everyone. The music is playing. The dancing has begun. The party is like none other because the son has come home who was lost and now he's found. And while the father is so excited about the return of his younger son, he has not forgotten the older brother. Yes, the father's joy was passionate. They couldn't wait to start celebrating. But as soon as he became aware of the other son's arrival, what does he do? We don't think about this, but what does the father do? He leaves the party. Why? Because everyone isn't here yet. There's still an empty spot at the table. Where's my son? Well, he's outside. He's not very happy. I got to go out and find him. We picture the father running down the roadway greeting his son. Picture this. The father jumping up from the table and running to the door and opening it up to see his son outside. In his jealousy and bitterness, the older son can only see the younger brother, this irresponsible brother. The only thing the older brother can see is that his younger brother is now receiving all of this attention. And the older brother wrongly concludes that he is the less loved of the two. But, however, and yet, the father's heart is not a divided heart. The father's free and spontaneous response to his younger son does not leave the older brother out. In fact, he wants to make the older brother part of the celebration. This is the heart of the parable. It is not about the younger son. It is not about the older son. The heart of the parable is this: God loves you. He loves us. He loves us so much that he is ready to throw a party when you return. Even after we have thrown everything away, he's ready to celebrate when you come home. And we are even loved so much that he will stop the celebration to come outside. And if it means he has to do it, he will beg us to join him at the table. This is such good news. You're not very excited, but it's really good news. But here's the problem. Are you ready? We live in a world that is constantly comparing us to others. We live in a world that is constantly ranking us, whether it's our intelligence, our attractiveness, or our success. When we hear someone praised, it's not hard to think of ourselves as someone less worthy. Well, look at that, and then look at me. When we read about the goodness and kindness of the things that other people are doing, it's hard not to wonder, am I that good? Can I be that kind? When I see trophies, rewards, and prizes being handed out to people, I cannot avoid asking the question or saying, why didn't that happen to me? I thought I was just as successful. In a world full of grades and scores and statistics, whether it is a conscious effort or whether it is an unconscious kind of thing, we have this tendency to measure ourselves against others. While God does not compare, we are really, really, really good at doing that. And because that's our nature as human beings, we sometimes tend to think of God as this some kind of keeper of some great celestial record up in heaven, and that I'm always afraid, and we live sometimes, that we're not going to make the God grade. You see what I mean? I know plenty of people like this. I'm sure you do too. Our problem is, in our humanness, we apply those traits to the Father. And we get our idea of God all wrong. It reminds me of the parable of the vineyard and the landowner. You may remember the parable, know about the parable. He paid the same amount of wages to the fellows who had worked all day. He gave the same amount of wages to those who only worked an hour. That morning comes and all the workers come in, and they've been there from 4 o'clock in the morning, and they work all day long, and then come 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's about an hour left of work. Some other workers come, and he says, come on in. And then at the end of that, he gives everybody the same wages, even the ones who worked an hour, as opposed to those who probably worked 10. Why didn't the landowner pay those who worked so many hours? And why did he pay them more? And why was he so generous to these two? Why is he paying everybody the same wages? We see the injustice of that. I do, and it drives me crazy. It would drive us nuts. That doesn't seem fair. But remember what I said about grace? The reason why grace isn't fair is because it isn't fair. It's for everybody. Maybe the landowner hoped that those who'd worked in the vineyard the whole day would be deeply grateful to have the opportunity to have worked all day and then be able to see how generous the landowner is towards those who only worked for a couple of hours. That is God's way of thinking. He looks at the people, he looks at the children of a family who are happy that they have done little. And let me say that again. He looks at his people as children of a family who are happy, who have done only a little, but are just as loved as those who do much. God doesn't play that comparison game. We like to think that he does, but that's our doing, not his. And why is the response of the landowner this? He says to him, why should you be talking to the people? Why should you be envious? Because I'm generous. You've been with me the whole day, and I gave you all that you asked for. Why are you so bitter? See, that same question that the landowner asked some of these workers, it can be found in the statement of the father in this parable as well. My son, you are with me always. You've always been here. All that I have is yours. You have nothing to worry about, my son. I know that you've been with me. I see you. I hear you. I know your thoughts. Did you catch that, what the father said? I see. I hear. I know. And here's his action. Come inside. Here's the truth of the passage, though. As long as we keep looking at God as a landowner, as a father who wants to get the most out of me for the least amount of cost, as long as we keep looking at God like that kind of, like a landowner who does that, we'll find ourselves lost and bitter and jealous and resentful to those with whom we think God finds favor with. We struggle. We try hard to follow the guidelines of the spiritual life, to pray, to read the Bible, and avoid all kinds of temptations. It just wears us down. It just wears us down. And I know that in a few weeks we're going to begin this. I'm going to start passing these out next week. I want you to know we're going to do this together as a family. I just want you to know this. It's not more work for you to do. This is not going to be a duty. This is not something to add to your plate. This is something to bring in to your life. When we do that in a few weeks, so if you don't hear anything else today, I want you to hear this. God is not the unfair landowner whose only goal is to use you to make a profit. I better say that again. God is not an unfair landowner whose only goal is to use you to make a profit, but rather he is the all-giving, all-forgiving Father who does not measure out his love to his kids according to how well they behave. I better say that one again too for Bob's and Dads. He is the all-giving, all-forgiving Father who does not measure out his love to his children according to the way they behave. He is the Father who has been trying to find you all along. And so the question is not, how am I to find God? The question is, how am I to let myself be found by God? The question is not, how am I to know God? But rather, how am I to let myself be known by God? The question is not, how am I going to love God? But how am I going to let myself be loved by God? I think we're asking the wrong questions sometimes. God is looking out in the distance, trying to find you and me, longing to bring us home. He is the good shepherd who goes looking for his lost sheep. Read the verses prior to this. These are all connected. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. He is the good shepherd who goes looking for the sheep. He is the woman who lights a lamp, then sweeps the house and searches everywhere for that lost coin until she finds it. He is the father who watches and waits and then runs to meet us, embrace us, plead with us, and literally begs us to come home. We did not choose God. Instead, God chooses us. He is the one who chases after us. He chases after me. He chases after you. And he invites me, and he invites you to join him at the table, to join him in the celebration that says this: we were once lost, but I finally allowed God to find me. I allowed God to find me. Sometimes the worst in our relationship with the Lord and finding God, the problem's not God. Most of the time it's us. Although we want to make it his problem, it really is our problem. And not only did he find me, this Father comes running after us. So if you're trying to find something to be thankful for this week, be thankful that God is not just a landowner, but he is the Father who is waiting and waiting and waiting for us to join him at the table. Amen.